Thank you for covering last month. Let's call to order. And we should stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, Carol, you want to do the roll call?
Lorraine Cox.
Here.
Charles Renuda.
Here.
John Byron.
Here.
Vinnie Taranto.
Here.
John Winter.
Here.
Terry Casta.
Here.
David Lane.
Here.
Karen McLaughlin. Stephanie Ely. John Durkin.
Here.
Courtney Barker. Here. Todd Swingle. Jean Artuso. And Danielle Bowden. Here. We have, I believe, we might have some late arrivals.
Okay, we haven't heard from anyone else. Okay. Okay. Has everyone had a chance to look at the agenda? Any changes to the agenda? Do I hear a motion to approve the agenda?
A motion to approve.
And a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, the motion passes. And the minutes. We had a chance to review the minutes.
Motion to approve. Second.
John seconds. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, it passes. Move on to Virginia's report.
Good morning. So the focus of this meeting is this second round of substitute project requests. And so we received 6 stormwater requests, which you all have. And we've reviewed them and worked with the cities on corrections and amendments and gotten those revised versions out to you for your consideration today. We've had the kickoff meeting on the master muck dredging permit. The MIMS, actually, Matt, I don't know if you want to give a whole sort of muck dredging update. A lot's happened this week in the world of dredging.
Sure. So the MIMS muck dredging project is fully underway now. They're mobilized at the spoil site. Construction of the berms for the site is underway. We're hoping in March they should actually be in the water and dredging. Additionally, the Sykes Creek project, which is probably the next one on the list there, that was it was a request for there was a review committee meeting held yesterday to review the request for proposals, and a contractor has been selected. There are still some issues we'll have to go through to get some of the details tightened up, but we have selected a contractor, and it looks as if we may be able to complete the work on that scope of that project.
With the available funding.
With the available funding.
And Turkey Creek.
And Turkey Creek has been, as you may recall, sediment was flushed down into the basin that was recently cleaned at the Turkey Creek project site. So we came back to clean that site out. That work is just being mobilized now, and they actually may be underway. They're very close to starting up to clean out the additional sediment that was brought into the basin.
Is that from Hurricane? Is that from Irma or?
That was from Irma, yes. So actually it was pretty much cleaned out. We had cleaned out the basin at the mouth of the creek. And then when the storm came, it flushed over 30,000 cubic yards of material back into that basin. So we came back, and it was funding authorized to support that through the SORL funding, and is also supported with grant funding. And then we're looking for FEMA funds to complete that.
Is that something we would expect to happen after every hurricane?
Well, I think it may be location specific, the way it may break down, because this particularly, we cleaned out the mouth of Turkey Creek, and there was still sediment had built up over years upriver, so to speak. So that's where the material came down from. So this could be expected in riverine type systems, in some of those tributary systems. It's less likely to happen, for example, in canal systems. If we clean out the canals, while there will be inputs from the surrounding upland areas, it wouldn't be as heavy as it was in this location.
Can I ask
Well, once the MIMS project starts, how long do you anticipate that taking?
I believe they're looking at 60 to 90 days of actual dredging.
Okay.
So it's not a huge site. It's the actually mobilization, getting everything laid out is a bigger piece of the project than the actual dredging.
Okay.
Whereas Sykes Creek is the opposite.
Sykes Creek is the opposite. Yes, there's a lot more involved in setting up the project, the pipeline, the spoil containment area, and all the related permitting, because there's permit modifications required, is a lot more of an investment than the actual dredging.
Okay.
And
Terry?
Turkey Creek, you said we're asking for FEMA?
Yes,
money?
we are. The request is in. It's kind of, our responses to this point are rather vague, but it is in
Which
as
is
support.
typical of FEMA.
Which is typical of FEMA, and it's, as also typical, it may take years to get the funding back, but it hasn't been flat out denied in any way. They're working with us in understanding what our request is.
Matt, to clarify, we voted to fund this with the assumption that we were paying, I think, 12%, and the balance would be FEMA.
Yes, correct.
So we're still working on the assumption we'll get reimbursed from FEMA?
Yes.
And it's always a leap of faith like this, which, always puts local governments in a difficult predicament, but our office has not had anything denied yet. We've got a good track record, and so we've had all the conversations with FEMA that you can have to try to get the people that should know to review the situation and give you their read on whether this should fly or not. But you can't get anything in writing. That's not the way FEMA works. If you are not determined that this is an emergency and you're going to do it no matter what, then it's not an emergency, and it's not their deal to assist.
They also, in my opinion, I think it's just things that we normally expected within a year are now going to take 3 to 4, maybe 5. And some training sessions that we've been to through GFOA, the government finance people, has indicated that that's true. That it's just because there's been so many disasters nationwide that they're under budget and they're struggling to pay out.
Thank you.
One last question. Matt, would you say that Turkey Creek is now at capacity with muck again, or is it?
No, it was, I want to say it was like 216 or 13,000 cubic yards removed, and now this is like an additional 30 to 40,000 has come in.
Okay.
So it's much less than we had removed initially.
But the surface area is the same, and this stuff all goes through the surface area, right?
Yeah, it appears to have come into the deeper part of the basin,
Okay,
into the
great.
central piece, so it's not widespread over the whole area, so it's more localized.
Yeah, it's a smaller template. So moving on to septic to sewer, the MICO project has completed its 60% design and is moving into permitting. We have 2 more city cost share contracts that have been fully executed, one with Cape Canaveral and one with Melbourne. There are 3 more Melbourne projects that have been put into contract and are circulating for signatures. The Facebook page has been updated with all of your previous meetings, meeting videos, and Brandon has started the process of clipping out those special presentations and is updating those, posting those as he gets them done, and is pacing them out to try to keep things active on the Facebook page. And the logo competition, all the rules and stuff that goes with that has been developed and sent over to our normal assistant county attorney, who is not here today. So that reminds me to introduce you to Christy Chirac, who's stepping in to help us out today. So welcome, Christy. At your seats and extra copies over there are the Senate bill version. There's also a House bill version of a $50 million dedicated fund for funding Indian River Lagoon projects that are part of the Indian River Lagoon Comprehensive Conservation and Management Plan. Dwayne DeFries has talked to you about that plan in the past, he's incorporating everything that's in our Save Our Unionville Lagoon plan, plus similar projects from all the other counties along the lagoon to go into his plan. And so if this dedicated funding were to happen, that would provide 50% matching funds, and it would be a competitive process, but that would at least provide a dedicated source of matching funds for us to go to. So encourage you to be familiar with that bill. There are lots of committee meetings going on in Tallahassee right now. Lots of phone calls from our legislative delegation. They're very engaged in trying to get funding for our projects. We have specific funding requests in for the Osprey wastewater treatment plant. That one went to a committee, had a committee stop yesterday. Septic to sewer projects, muck removal, and the oyster reef project. So all of those are sponsored in the House and Senate and are hopefully moving through committee. So much more positive outlook on potential for state funding this session than last year. So good news. The third bullet under work underway is unfortunately a bit cryptic. So the memo to cities, that was your request last meeting regarding sewage overflows, to reach out to the cities and find out what sort of overflows they had and what sort of actions they have been taking as a result of that, corrective actions and what their needs are. And so we developed that memo and we sent it to one city to get their feedback, to make sure that we're asking the right questions the right way before we send it to all of the cities. And muck finders, we
Do you
had...
anticipate that going out this month then?
Yes,
That memo?
yes, yes,
Okay.
within a week or two, I think that should go out.
And you're asking for a response by when?
I
just wanted to follow up in my municipality.
okay, we can let you know
Okay.
when it goes out.
Okay.
We're waiting for Cape Canaveral to respond, so,
Okay.
and we didn't.
Kindly worded, right? Very
Yes,
kindly worded.
yes. Muck finders, we reported last month that it works well in the shallow areas and not the deeper areas, so we had a little team meeting on what we could do about the deeper areas. We have some ideas about ways to collect data in those deeper areas, so we're working on that and have an area selected, and we'll see if we can't improve that process.
Virginia, just curiosity, define shallow and deep.
I think it was 3 meters. It's kind of
20 feet is the next limit.
20 feet of water plus muck combined.
Right.
Was the length of the pole.
Right. So 15 feet.
So 15 feet water depth roughly is the limit of using muck finders.
The current pole that's used is a PVC pole that is 20 feet long. So you've got a person standing on the deck of a boat, dangling off the bow of the boat, trying to push this thing into muck. And so you have water depth and you have muck depth. And so it's the combination of water and muck plus whatever the elevation of the person is above the water pushing. So,
And since the vast majority of the lagoon is less than 2 meters in depth, this
it's
is...
not a problem. But
Yeah,
in some
okay.
of these deeper areas it is. And if you just add more length to a PVC pole, it becomes too wiggly and flimsy and you can't really push. So we're looking at using aluminum rods and, lightweight aluminum rods and coming up with a different...
Or maybe just not using muck finders in areas where the water is more than 15 feet deep.
Right.
Okay.
On the irrigation well water quality, the committee had asked if we could look into using some citizen science to use typically available water quality test kits from, aquarium stores and shallow water irrigation wells. We looked at all the majority of off-the-shelf little test kits available. They are not of the quality that we need for this exercise. We've now looked at the sort of least expensive end of probes, the $1,500 kind of probes. Those are also not adequate. They get you plus or minus 2 milligrams per liter, and we're trying to measure things at a finer scale than that, so that doesn't work. So we're now looking at the more expensive probes. Of course, as we look at more and more expensive technology, then you're not going to entrust that with citizen science. And so, our options are getting more and more limited there, but we're still looking.
What if, in that arena, we looked at the municipalities doing sample tests throughout, like in select areas of the city, so we could just publish that to the community and saying, hey, we've tested X wells over in these spots. For your information, the nutrient content of that is.
Yes.
And publish that rather than depend on the individual residents to do their own well testing. That might be a easier, more cost-effective way to get the word out. So.
Right, I think the real cost savings there is not having to drill a whole bunch of extra new wells.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so if we can come up with, a way to test whether existing irrigation wells give us some useful data or not, then, that's
Okay.
that's helpful.
Okay.
And
we
that's
can-
not done regularly now.
No.
No.
It strikes me that this has got both the top-down and the bottom-up quality. The bottom-up is the numbers are going to come out of the wells, out of the municipality and governing bodies. But the top-down is going to be organizing, asking for, tabulating, and presenting it. So are you going to take that on, or who's going to organize the chase for numbers?
Well, I think,
I think an individual city would have to come up with that.
But wouldn't it be nice if the county put out a letter that says, please do this and let us know, and here's a deadline, and report back to us, because otherwise this runs the risk of being fifth on a three list priority, or three item priority list. Can you send out a letter?
How much will the equipment be?
I think we're now looking at sort of $25,000 probes. So we're going to end up with, one or two people with very expensive equipment going out and doing this. And we're going to have to collect, bottled samples, send them to the lab to make sure that we're getting the right answers. And so, this is going to end up being a staff-driven thing. And the city staff, there are some cities that may have staff that can help us. But I think, where the outreach happens is in identifying who has shallow water irrigation wells and is willing to give us permission to come test their wells.
Because on Beachside, you could find all of those on city property. All over. Most of us have irrigation wells all through our facilities. So, that might be a starting point where we can say, we don't really need to go to people. We could just do it within city properties, do a pilot or test, a sample, and then send that, maybe those results to say, hey, this is actually, if it comes out the way we think it is, this might be something we want to replicate somewhere else, because I think we might not have that capability in other areas of the county, but I'm sure you can find volunteers that would be happy to pony up their well if that alleviates them from having to fertilize their yard.
What about shipping samples off?
Yes.
Could we, would it be appropriate to just ask that you come back to us at a future meeting in a quiet time and tell us how you think this ought to be organized and who ought to do what and so on, and rather than us inventing a program on the wing here?
Right.
Could you do that?
Yeah, we're just still trying to figure out, what the equipment would be so that we can develop a process. 'Cause
So
until
this is an open item. Thank you.
Yes.
I was going to suggest that maybe each of us that has a shallow well, I would be more than willing for you to come test mine. So just know that I think, on our committee, we represent quite a few different locations in the county, and if we have wells, I'm more than willing.
Okay, so everybody who has a shallow water well that is willing to have it sampled, if you would please email Walker Dawson, and you have all of the staff's contact information in your packet now, so please email Walker.
So this thing's completely morphed. The original,
Yes.
the original idea, which I thought was very useful, was a little $5 or $10 kit where a homeowner could see if there was high nitrogen and they don't need to buy fertilizer, which would be an awesome thing. So I'm wondering, you know, just like I take my water from my pool to a commercial place and have them test it and tell me what to put in, have we gone to the point where now people are going to have to bring their water to some local county or city office and have it tested, and that's going to cost a lot of money? I mean, we've got completely away from the idea, which I thought was a great idea, that obviously is not practical. So I'm not sure we even need to explore this a lot farther. We're way away from what we started.
Todd?
I would tend to disagree, just because the last meeting, we just approved, what, $25,000 on a program that we talked about was primarily focused on engagement and awareness. And so if it's a $20,000 piece of equipment, in the grand scheme of things, is not that much money. If it starts to build awareness, and if we can just figure out how to deploy it in a way that is helpful to build
Todd, I would
engagement
agree, but I wonder if there's already a commercial lab somewhere, and all we got to do is take a bottle over to your well, put a stamp on it, mail it to a lab, and get your report back.
So to that point,
when we sell houses, we send well water samples to UF. Somebody brings it down. I've never actually done it for a customer, and I think it's under $100. They can get everything
And that's
tested.
drinking water, for drinking
Yeah,
water.
so it would be drinking water. There's a lab that does it. How capable are they of giving us these kind of answers?
Todd?
so just one quick additional suggestion on a place you might check is, I don't know how many of the wastewater facilities around are monitoring their nutrient and may already have all this equipment, and as a partnership opportunity with the cities, it might be that where they can bring a sample by and quickly sample it, because I would suspect most of those wastewater plants have nutrient monitoring or a certified lab of some sort. That this might be a partnership opportunity with the cities.
And don't we have monitoring coming off of the new dredging sites? So I grant you that was a $400,000 part of the project. That was for cleaning, but there's obviously a monitor at the back end of that. Those
are lab samples also. Those samples will be taken and sent to labs also.
So we have labs that are accessible.
Okay, John Byron?
One of the charges of this committee is that we take a hard look at science and technology as we move forward through time. And in a year's time, we've advanced certain areas of knowledge. An area of knowledge that I think is still unknown is what is the true nutrient quality of what's the map of nutrient concentration in the groundwater around the county and in the reclaimed water that we're squirting on the lawns. And I think this is a proper pursuit for this committee, just to come up with that map, which I don't think exists right now at all. And some city may know, but you know, I've got a hose bib that I can turn on. It's reclaimed water, and I don't know what's in it. And that's a city by city thing. There's also the groundwater question for bodies of groundwater that are likely to find their way to the lagoon. So those two numbers I think, are proper things for this city or this committee to explore inside the charging that has come to us from the county commission.
Just as a point of clarification, what's in the reclaim should be readily available, because all the wastewater plants have to monitor that. So if that's an education piece and getting data out there, that we can get out there.
And it's in the plan. That data
It's
is
actually
in the plan.
Okay.
But we need to develop an education piece to go along with that, and that's on our list of,
Yeah,
our education wish list.
But it doesn't.
It's wholly different between reclaimed, which is used publicly and somewhat privately, and private wells. And that's what this all started with, is what you would call groundwater nutrient concentration, John. But the reclaimed stuff is part of funding that we're trying to improve on, and we know what's being dumped by the cities. I mean, that's public record. So.
All right.
On the private side, we may find that we don't need to sample every well, we sample, a few wells in the neighborhood, and we get an idea of what the groundwater is in that neighborhood, and
Right.
the whole neighborhood's going to be fairly similar.
Right.
So hopefully we can find a way to get a grip on that fairly
Once we
soon.
have that map, it kind of lends itself to a visual that, maybe the public, the average bear can easily grasp and get an idea.
Yeah, I think the communication part that everyone's been talking about is one of the things that, I know originally, as John said, we had wanted to be able to give the homeowner a chance to go out to their yard and do something, and that action in itself is an education to do it, but as we work our way up the price scale, if we still get the information, then we just figure out how to package it in the same way to get them to learn, to get us to learn.
Okay, great. We
Okay.
stopped you.
That's fine. We have a volunteer that just came back last week who has volunteered with our office before. We know she's very talented, and so she is been dedicated to producing the online map-based tool for our Living Shoreline Master Plan. So we're excited to have her back, and that work is underway. So
And the master plan is due in the spring?
the mapping
Yes.
was done by University of Central Florida, and it was finished October.
Okay.
But we have to combine that with several other data sets and then put it all in GIS and make a user-friendly map GUI interface. And so that's what this volunteer will be doing.
Okay.
Can she be recognized, or is she anonymous?
I would love to recognize her if my brain would work well enough this morning. So my apologies to her.
Virginia, I know the biosolids research is underway with a House bill filed to stop open air drying, so that's the muck dredging. There's a bill out that will not allow you to set the muck out to dry, is that what that is?
It's not
No,
muck, I think.
biosolids are the,
Wastewater
from
solids.
wastewater treatment plants.
Okay.
Yeah.
On the back side of the monthly staff report, under volunteer participation opportunities, we always have the contact information for how to help with oyster projects and living shorelines and muck finders. We've added Keep Brevard Beautiful's lagoon-friendly lawns. Want to encourage people anyone who's interested in a lagoon-friendly lawn to reach out to that program for those resources and ideas. And of course, our extension office also has the My Brevard Yard program we ought to add to this with lots of resources for how to have a more lagoon-friendly lawn. We've added under future topics for special presentations, we've added your request for DEP to come present and have a city panel presentation on responses to the emergency sewage releases. So we'll be trying to work that up for this spring. And then the last thing I want to highlight is that Monday is the deadline for all other substitute project requests other than the stormwater. Yay, thank you. The volunteer is Megan Barron. My apologies, Megan, I just couldn't remember your last name. So, yes, welcome back to Megan Barron. So January 22nd, Monday, we should have lots more requests in from cities for all sorts of other project types, and the cities we've had quite a bit of dialogue this go-around with the cities on numerous different project types. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how the 44 projects last year that were almost all stormwater, now they're beginning to understand more what we're trying to do with the plan. They've had time to think about all these other different project types, and we're going to get quite a diversity of projects this go-around.
Probably the place to put it in. I would say one thing about last year's big tranche of stuff. We had to invent year zero. We needed 9 months worth of projects, and that's where that came from. You're going to tell us in a few minutes that we got more money than we expected to get, and you're going to show us that by the end of forthcoming fiscal year, if straight line stays straight, it's about 22 million more in the bank than anticipated. Our job isn't to save money, it's to spend it wisely. And I'm concerned with our ability, and this goes to substitute projects for FY17/18. I'm concerned with our ability to sop up the money. And I would hope that the bogey we're dealing with in saying this is our budget request for FY17/18 to the city commission, or the county commission rolls forward in March, would include the baseline 32 million per year.
34.
Plus how much money is left in the bank from the fiscal year that we just closed out, unobligated.
Yes.
So I think we need to have a budget request that has the combination of substitute projects plus year 2 projects plus year 3 pull-ahead projects that amounts to nominal 42 million rather than just the 32 million. The concern is if the amount of money that's coming, the amount of requests that's coming in on substitute projects ain't very much, and right now it ain't very much. See, the county staff's going to have to do some scrambling to find out what are you going to add in on top of the 32 million that's in the year 2 plan from future years to sop up the money. It would be disappointing if we didn't spend what's in the bank at the end of the last year plus 32 million.
Yeah, in terms of the projects, so my understanding is the stormwater are less expensive and the projects that we're anticipating are going to be.
This is MEDAC's
more.
math, okay? This is MEDAC's budgeting, but I think the onus is on you to come forward. We will deal with the budget request in March, April timeframe. And we need to see 42 million for FY17/18, or whatever the right number is, pretty close to that, rather than 32 million plus substitute project loose change.
Charles?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of a clarifying question. When we say substitute, that means something's coming on. And so maybe it's more not substitute, but it's additive based on the budget and the, how worthy the project is.
There's a shopping cart that's full of FY17/18 stuff, and when we go through the checkout lane, it ought to come up with a tag that says 42 million. And I think it's on you to figure that out.
John, I mean, there are projects that were time framed out and can't be pulled forward.
We certainly want to pull forward. We have the funds. We need to pull forward every project that we can. But I agree with you, Charles. The use of the word substitute, to me, indicates take one thing out, put another in. And I think what we have the ability to do is be additive. Projects that are coming in right now, assuming that they meet our criteria, we have the funding. Let's push these projects forward and move forward on the Lagoon.
John Windsor.
Isn't this under new business, under the topics we have coming up? Can we hold the discussion till then and finish with this discussion?
Well, and one more thing I'd like to add before we leave it completely.
I guess no is the answer.
Is that it's not just county staff. It's also the municipalities and other governing bodies that have projects currently in the plan in future years. They need to be aware that we will probably be looking for pull-aheads. And that completes the discussion.
And so I had something that was on the topic that I wanted to address, and that's under upcoming lagoon science. You have listed there the Indian River Lagoon Symposium, and that's a heck of a commitment to drive down there all day. They have for the last couple of years, because it's sold out, they've put it online, but they don't announce the website until like the day before. And so I think it would be really nice if everybody on the committee got the link somehow. If I see it, I'll send it out to you, Virginia, or to Carol.
John, send it to Brandon, and he can post it on the Facebook. And that way, as soon as he gets it, everyone else will have it.
Okay.
And an email would be nice.
And that way you can pop in and out and just, spend a half hour or an hour. The topics are great.
Yeah. It's a wonderful event. Very, very educational, and there are a lot of 20-minute presentations, 15, 20-minute presentations, and then there are hordes of 3-minute presentations. And so you cover huge breadth of information about the lagoon in a day.
And it's really Thursday that matters. The Friday is like a public workshop type thing that I didn't stay for last time, but the Thursday is the one with all the presentations. So when you look at that 8 and 9, you don't have to be there for 9.
Okay.
Just on that topic, do we need to disclose who's going to be attending that live from the committee?
I don't think, because there's very little interaction there. You're sitting in an audience and you're absorbing. I know if they were to ask questions during Q&A, they're directing questions at the speakers. Do you see them?
I'm not going to have a discussion.
You do see a problem? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So on the fiscal, the financial statement, the first check of this fiscal year has arrived for $3,227,000. That brings our current total revenues to $35.3 million. Well ahead of the approximately $28 million that we anticipated by now. And so, yes, we will be looking at ways to accelerate everything that anybody thinks they can accelerate the schedule on. And the adopted budget, if you look at the bottom line on the back page, the second column, the budget column, you see that the project total in this year's budget is $41.8 million. So we already budgeted to absorb the anticipated balance forward from last fiscal year, plus the revenues from this fiscal year. But there's even more revenues coming in ahead of schedule. So this number will go up in the mid-year process to the extent that we can find projects that are ready to go. The hard part is we still want good projects, we want cost-effective projects. So it's the balancing act between building things now and making sure that what we build is quality. That's it for my report.
All right. Okay, is Bill Tredik? So, from St. John's?
So let me just say, I asked Bill Tredik if he could present this project to you this morning. It's the biggest of the 6 stormwater projects that were submitted. It's a project that we've been talking to the district about for about a year now, and the county is very excited about this project. It's got some unique qualities to it that I thought were best presented this way rather than explained on a form. So thank you, Bill, for coming down from Palatka this morning.
Actually, I came down last night because this was an early meeting.
Yes.
It's warm
I didn't want to leave at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the morning. But anyway, my name is Bill Tredik. I'm with the St. Johns River Water Management District. Thank you all for having me. Thank you, Virginia, for that introduction. I'm really excited to be here today to talk about the Crane Creek M1 Flow Restoration Project. It's something that the district is moving forward with design on right now. And I'm going to go through it a little bit and talk a little bit about it, give you some background, and be happy to take any questions that any of you have on it. So where did this start? The Crane Creek project actually began in a joint partnership with the IRL Council, which now runs the National Estuary Program. DEP, their contribution to the council for 1 year went towards this, and the district also put revenue towards this feasibility study, which looked at the next generation of large-scale projects to help the Indian River Lagoon. And by next generation and large scale, large really means projects that are beneficial, highly beneficial to the lagoon, but also are a little bit too big for a local government or a single agency to really undertake alone. I mean, we're talking things in the sometimes tens of millions of dollar projects. The feasibility study began in 2016 and was completed in January 2017. We looked at over 40 projects. We met with all the local stakeholders, the counties up and down Lagoon, including Martin and St. Lucie, which actually aren't even in our area, but they are in the IRL NEP's area. We picked 9 projects to really zoom in on and take a closer look at. 5 of those projects touch or are within your county. Some of them are pretty big. We looked at, read the list here, which I don't typically do, but Crane Creek I have highlighted in yellow. Satilli Canal, which is towards your southern end, there's an opportunity there to get some treatment and move water west. C-54 and Fellsmere Canal, another big possibility there. Most of that's in the county of the South, Indian River County, but C-54 is right kind of on the border. The C1 base flow treatment project which was a project which Virginia's group brought to our attention, which has some potential to treat waters in the C1 canal before they go into Turkey Creek. And the C10 water management area, which we are also in design on right now. So there's a lot of projects in the mix right now. We decided to move forward with the design on the Crane Creek. So let me just tell you what this slide is before I start talking about it. This slide shows the topography in the watershed. The whitish area, looks a little different on the screen here, but the whitish area going up and down in the middle is the coastal ridge. You can see the M1 canal. Does this have a pointer? Oh, it's okay, the mouse maybe. The M1 canal cuts right through a low spot in the coastal ridge and drains down into Crane Creek and out into the Indian River Lagoon. The cities involved here, we're working with West Melbourne, Melbourne Village, City of Melbourne, which is downstream, and of course the county on trying to solve this project. This canal was dug back almost 100 years ago now to drain the areas which are in the upper St. Johns River basin, drain them out to the tide so that they could do agriculture. And as time has moved on, agriculture's turned over towards development. But the problem is all this water flows unimpeded out into the Indian River Lagoon through Crane Creek. We're talking about, let me go ahead one slide here. Roughly 5,300 acres, which used to go to the St. Johns River, now drains out to Crane Creek and into the Indian River Lagoon. So this project basically will try to capture a good bit of that water and to put it back in the St. Johns River. And with that water is a fair amount of nutrients. Just some of the key features of the project will have an operable weir gate structure, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, on the east end, somewhere around Evans Road. The exact location isn't determined yet. But we'll have, you can see the M1 canal, we'll have a pump station on the west end, which will pump through a force main under I-95 to a property to the west, which actually I'll also talk about towards the end of the presentation, which is a property that the county's looking at acquiring for floodplain mitigation for some roadway improvements out there. You can see the Heritage Parkway, and there's an interchange going in at Ellis Road. So those are things that the county and DOT are both using that parcel, or will be using that parcel, for floodplain mitigation. So that water, I talked about that water going out unimpeded into Crane Creek. Our consultant who's here with us today, Jones Edmonds and Associates, looked at 10 years of data to try to figure out how much nutrients we're actually removing or could remove. And what they found is there's a fair amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, and solids in the water that's flowing into Crane Creek. I might have said Turkey Creek a minute ago. If I did, I apologize. All that water goes straight in there, untreated, 24 hours a day, more when it rains, but even on low flows, you get a steady stream of nutrients flowing into Crane Creek. So that's what we're really trying to catch. We're trying to catch what we can. There's no way to really catch the big stuff, the big events, because we have to provide flood protection. So how much can we pull out? That's the big question. This graph really shows a relationship between what we can pump and what we can move out. And what you see from this, and this involved quite a bit of study in the feasibility report by Jones Edmonds, but what you see is up to about 40 cubic feet per second. We do pretty well, but then there's a diminishing returns after that. And a lot of that's due to the fact the first flush has the lion's share of the nutrients. Over 40 CFS, you're now starting to pump bigger storm events, which we really can't reasonably pump those and provide for a few reasons. Number one, it gets really expensive to pump high volumes. And also, there's only so much we can treat before we discharge into the St. Johns River. We can't put that water in before we take as much nitrogen and phosphorus and solids out as we can. And so there's some limits on that end. If we put 80 CFS, that site I talked about wouldn't be able to remove it before it goes in the St. Johns River. So, you know, we have some project constraints we're dealing with here, and we settled upon 40 CFS because we thought that is right about where that line is starting to flatten out, and we can get that treated in that site out there. So based on a 40 cubic feet per second design, the consultant determined that about 23,000 pounds of total nitrogen can be removed annually. Also about 2,700 pounds of total phosphorus. And just as importantly are the suspended solids, because, you know, Crane Creek was dredged, about a decade ago, something like that. It's gonna fill up with sediments and muck again, so this is a perfect project to try to capture some of those sediments, keep them from getting into the system to begin with. You know, the district's right now doing an Oak Alley dredging project where we're taking out over 600,000 cubic yards of muck. The county's got tons of dredging projects trying to get this muck out. So these solids are really important, and the more we can do to get them out of the tributaries and back where they historically would have gone, the better. You can see also the costs on this slide. Roughly an $8 to $9 million construction. Again, pretty large ticket, which is why we're looking for partners on this, including state partners. A little bit of maintenance costs involved here, which we'll work out and be negotiating with how that all plays out, whose responsibilities are what. We're not quite there yet. And annualized life cycle costs is shown. So this project, this slide here shows some of the projects that were looked at in the feasibility study that I mentioned a minute ago. Crane Creek is highlighted. You can see it's pretty competitive with some of the top projects. One thing you'll notice is that the projects that had the best cost-benefit ratio were flow restoration projects to the St. Johns River, to try to, because everything in this water that we remove, every bit of nitrogen, every bit of phosphorus, every bit of TSS that we remove doesn't go into the IRL, so we don't have to worry about efficiency rates, how well the stormwater systems are working. We just got to make sure the pumps keep working and we keep the treatment on the west end keeps working. So every bit of that, and this in a way is very similar to the C1 project, which the first phase is operational in Palm Bay. It's quite a bit smaller, but it's a very similar concept. Stage the water up a little bit, pump it west, but also, and I'll talk about it in a minute, flood control, make sure that you don't have any flood issues arising because of it. So I mentioned flood control. This is it's not necessarily the type of weir we're going to be designing, but it is an example of an operable weir. We may end up with something a little different, possibly an overshot weir like we have at MS1 in Palm Bay. That's not determined yet, but the bottom line is we can't make things worse for flood control. We're doing extensive modeling to make sure that we don't. We're well aware of the issues that, and our consultant is too. They've done some work in the area of some of the issues that are in West Melbourne, Melbourne Village, Lamplighter. There are drainage concerns out there, and first and foremost, we are not going to do anything to aggravate that drainage. We're going to get what we can, get the treatment we can, but we're also going to be extremely conscious of that, and we'll work with the county all the way through the process to make sure that those residents in those lower lying areas are not negatively impacted. That's like our mandate on this project. We simply can't do that. Yes?
Is there any intent to redirect the canal itself, to move it?
That hasn't really been looked at. You know, it provides a pretty good flood protection benefit, and I could ask our consultant, but we didn't look at that in the initial study, no.
The reason I ask is because there are concerns in the widening of that roadway where that canal is, and I just wondered if that was a consideration at all.
I'll ask our consultant to.
The widening of which road? Of F?
Which road?
Ellis.
Of Ellis. That's not M1.
The Ellis, that I believe DOT is putting, aren't they putting some culverts under I-95 in that location? to provide flood relief in certain situations. Yeah, I think that's being looked at, but not by this project.
So the purpose of this canal 100 years ago was essentially flood control for ag areas.
Yeah.
The purpose no longer exists, obviously.
Correct.
Is there, this is real simple, but is there any reason the canal still exists?
Because.
Or is it primarily flood control?
It's flood control.
Okay.
It is really the only relief valve for everything west of that coastal ridge I showed on that other slide. You know, there's a series of these up and down the coast that were dug through the coastal ridge. There's C1, Satilli, C54, Old
And then
Fellsmere Canal.
the
things like that.
nutrients are just a result of the runoff from the
Nutrients
development
are
in that area?
a lot of things, but runoff. It could, what we measured was the water quality in the canal, so we didn't source it. I would expect it's a mixture of things. I don't know the septic layout out there. That's probably a component too. Fertilizer's probably a component. The whole gamut, everything that gets into that through various sources contributes to those loads. The solids are, I would imagine, primarily surface runoff and erosion that occurs. So what this project is going to try to do, and will do, is capture about 2 inches of rainfall. And one of the things, we talked about flood control, the pumps on the west end are going to keep the system drawn down to some degree so that it has the capacity to take on that water before and, you know, a storm. And during a storm, they'll continue pumping, except in instances where the storms are large, in which cases the floodplain mitigation, which I'll talk about in a minute, has to kick in. But as I mentioned, we're well aware of the upstream drainage, but we're also, like we did with Melbourne Tillman on the C1 canal, we've got to look at preemptive drawdown criteria, operation manuals, to make sure that a storm's coming up the coast, this system doesn't impede flooding, or doesn't impede drainage, doesn't cause any flooding problems. So that's, again, going to be a top priority. So I mentioned the property to the west. It's the Welchwood property. I'll go through this slide quickly. This is the parcel that the county's currently trying to buy. I think they should have it in a month or so, maybe 2. The Heritage Parkway is going to go right through the eastern portion of this, right down through here. And so this area to the west is where we'd be looking at providing treatment, as well as allowing it to serve as floodplain mitigation for for the St. Johns River. Real simple kind of concept. We'd start with a pool area to get some residence time. The water would come into the wet area, filter through a wetland or marsh treatment type of system, and then flow out through a weir and out into the St. Johns River towards the Lake Washington area, which also provides a potential water supply benefit of almost 9 million gallons a day on the long-term average on this. So not only is it an IRL benefit, but it also has a water supply benefit. So it's kind of a win-win. And this, using the site this way, is also a win-win because, yes, it's floodplain mitigation. When they need it for that, when the water elevations start coming up in the St. Johns River, we're not going to pump. We're going to use that and let it be used for floodplain mitigation. The water will overtop the perimeter sheet pile or berm. Not sure of the final design on that yet. They'll overtop that, move into the site just as if it were part of the riverine floodplain, and then drain back out as the river system recedes. So we're not going to impede that, and that's, again, a key constraint.
Would this area have the potential to be like a wildlife viewing area, like near wetlands?
It certainly has that potential, yeah. If the wetlands are a nice, healthy system, which we've seen in quite a few of other similar places, I imagine you will have some bird viewing, that sort of thing out there.
Is there any thought about building that into the plan so that there would be public access?
We can look at that. We can certainly look at that. We'll talk with the county about that and make sure there's access to that site, first of all, at least some sort of. I know that I haven't gotten to that point yet, but we can definitely take that into consideration. That's a good idea. I
Well,
like that.
it fits with ecotourism. Maybe you want to talk to the DDC.
And Terry?
So I'm just trying to get my head around this. There's a weir on the east end. Is the normal flow, non-flood conditions going to be to the west? We're going to pump the content of the canal, the drainage canal, over to the west and treat it there?
Yes.
conditions, in extreme flood conditions, then it would overflow, or we'd open the weir and it would go out into the.
Correct.
All right.
It'll go in both directions.
Yeah, and we're also, we'll have to look a little bit to make sure that we may have a need to let a little water out, keep that area immediately downstream of the weir, and we're going to look at that too, to see if there's a minimum base flow that needs to be done. I don't know that there will be, but if there is, we'll take a look at that.
Just for what, to keep that flush?
Keep it flush, keep it wet, keep it moving. Yeah. So we had a similar thing with the MS1 structure in Palm Bay, where we have a 25 CFS minimum base flow that we keep. But that, in that case, you have a preserve there. We're trying to keep more fresh than salt. So, but this is pretty far upstream of the salt portion. It goes through the golf course downstream and things like that. So.
I'm trying to figure out, so the road we were talking about, the Apollo to Stewart, crosses that canal, right? Is that the canal we're talking about?
It's way downstream.
Okay, so
That's in
what
the,
we're
it's in
talking
the,
about
it's
is
in the
farther west
O'Galley
of
River.
that.
Yes. Yeah, our work is going to be from Evans Road West.
Evans,
I could go back to that map if that would help.
By the mall.
By the shop.
By the mall.
By the mall.
So right there by the, it's kind of south of the western portion of the airport.
okay.
It's where the roads are closed now because the road's washed out.
Dairy and, yeah.
Dairy in the
Oaks.
back of the mall.
All the good back roads.
So I want to let you know, right now we're in design. We have a kickoff meeting internally with our staff scheduled for the 26th. Our design's going to be complete in 2019, and hearing what you're saying about wanting to move these, I will push the consultants to try to keep this moving and get it done ahead of time if possible. Our goal is to get this shovel ready as quickly as possible, but there are things we have to go through permitting and the H&H analysis and things to make sure that it's a safe project for all the residents as far as flood control. So there's a bit of work there that has to be done first. Our planned start pending funding is November 2019 for construction. And we think it's going to take 2 years. I have 2 to 3, but I'm pretty sure we can do it in 2 years of construction.
John?
Did I read that the budget was 8 to 9 million for the project?
8 to 9 million, yes.
Specify.
Yeah.
John Byron.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I suspect you don't go to too many places where the people on the other side of the table say, can we give you more money? But it looks to me like we've got about $10 million in the forthcoming budgets that's unobligated. You've got 5 other projects. In addition to pushing this to the left, 4 other projects. Would it be worthwhile for you to look at whether or not you have the bandwidth, et cetera, to pull 1 or 2 of them into this fiscal year we're considering as well? This is good. This is big stuff from its impact. It's a sort of large volume project that has a real impact on the canal, and you guys are doing a super job.
Thank you.
Partnering on Indian River Lagoon fixes. So I think that's something that ought to be looked at, and Virginia, I think that's something you ought to care about. These guys got a big sponge to sop up money.
What is the request for our contribution toward this project? Is it based on our $90?
Yes.
So approximately, they're requesting about $2 million. I'm all in favor of that. Let's move forward. Or more.
Well, this project has got a price that's going to come to us for a vote here in a few minutes.
Yeah.
We ought to be thinking about other projects to help her spend the money.
Well, right now, this is the one we're designing. We do have in our plan to start design on other projects in upcoming years, Sotilli Canal, things like that.
Yeah, the C10 is already.
C10 is already largely designed. It's 60+%. So, but that's a big project. That's a $25 million project. So.
Well, if you could drop a big wedge into the forthcoming budget, that would help her sop up the money.
Okay, we can talk about that.
Are you getting any help from Indian River County?
Not for this particular project. We're working with them on some cost shares and
Some of these
things.
waterways, though, you mentioned were on the line.
The Fellsmere?
We haven't gotten to that point on that project yet. It hasn't come out. It's still in the feasibility phase. So as we move forward with design, I'm sure we'll be reaching out to them to talk.
The 8 to 9 million is the entire project. It's not just the next 18 months of planning, but it's the entire project.
That is the entire construction of the project.
Okay. And can we include, this is kind of a question, Virginia, stuff like planning, permitting, et cetera, can we fund toward parts of that to get a project like this moving?
Yeah, so what we are doing is identifying what the, according to the formula, how much dollars can we put towards the entire project. And so if we're funding approximately $2 million of an $8 million project, that's 25%. And then as whoever the sponsor is, has expenses, whether they're design, planning, permitting, whatever, they submit those expenses for reimbursement, and we provide the 25%.
And so, Bill, working on an assumption that we can provide 25%, do you have funding for the other 75?
Not at this point.
How short are you?
It's subject to budgeting. We have not budgeted for that year yet. It's in our work plan, but the funding source has not yet been identified. It may be state appropriations, it may be district sources, it may be other partners too. So we're just not quite there yet, but we plan to be in the FY 2019-2020 year.
And for me, that brings just up a real good point of how we approach this as a committee and a strategy standpoint, because I completely agree. These are high mass removal projects. They're relatively efficient on dollars per pound, all of those things. I just want us to be very cautious when we get over aggressive on funding when there's large state agencies and state funding and things like that we don't get into one of the problem areas of that, we've got IRL money available now, so the state money's not going to be there. So we don't want to be the easy funding source that eliminates things that were already going to be there. And I know that there are funding challenges as well. So I think it behooves us to have some, before we get down to getting into some of these other projects that haven't yet been envisioned, really have some honest and candid discussions about what the likelihood of these already occurring are, so that we're not just throwing money at things that are likely to occur anyway. And that's the same discussion we've had with the cities and of where if we fund something, our expectation is there's going to be more, though that money's still going to remain working toward the lagoon. So I think it's just a watch out that we need to be aware of.
Mm-hmm. Can I respond to that? That's a great point. And this particular project is one that the executive director of St. John's River Water Management District has reached out to us on a number of occasions. It's one she is very committed to if there is a local partnership. And so, for this one, they've got, they looked at 40 different projects. They narrowed it down to 9. They're trying to figure out what their priorities are. This will be a priority if we are at the table.
Okay.
It will.
That's exactly true.
And so, yes, we need to be having those conversations.
And there's a lot of these projects that fail because they don't have partners and they don't have funding. I just think it behooves us to really have those transparent discussions.
Yes, so there are a lot of projects that somebody has got to be willing to step up and say, we will be a secure partner. We will be the seed source that you use to then go leverage all these other matching funds. And, sometimes that's the hardest thing to find is that first commitment. And so we don't want to get out ahead of all the other agencies and miss out on opportunities, but we also, want to make sure that we use these dollars to make sure we don't miss opportunities.
Agreed.
And I think I'm sorry.
Courtney.
I think the way we wrote the plan kind of pushes us to what you just said, because we can only participate in so much. There's no way we can give 100% of the money to you. So the way it's written kind of creates that atmosphere already. So I think we're kind of protected in that respect.
John.
Point well taken, Todd. And the topic is budget strategy. This is a lousy body to do county budget strategy. We're good folks, I think, to comment on it. But I think it lives on your side of the table, and you and comptroller and county manager and so on, to keep well in mind the excellent point that Todd makes, that we need to be able to defend what we spend, and that this topic of budget strategy is one that can't be ignored.
Yes.
Back to the design of the plan, how often do we get 2 inches of rainfall?
Seems to be a lot more lately. A 2-inch rainfall is, correct me if I'm wrong, around a mean annual
Is what?
rainfall. So on average, it might happen once a year.
2 inches?
Yeah.
Once a year?
On average,
Yeah.
recent history does not meet the old averages too well, but that is what all the tables, the rainfall charts, the hydrographs, that sort of thing were based on. It's actually a little more than 2 inches for a mean annual, I think, depending on where you are in Florida. I think in some areas it's 2.33. You know, you're seeing things recently that are in the 100 to 500 year rainfall.
Yeah, I think when you start looking at average, if you did a graph of how many times something is the average, the actual times it hits that graph is very few. You know, it might be once or twice in 50 years. So you need to look at the variability within your data set. I did kind of a question though too. I think this is a great illustration of something that happened like 100 years ago that we're now dealing with, which kind of gives us, and I hope the citizens, an idea of, it took a long time to get us to where we are at, and it's going to take a long time to get us where we need to be. So we need to communicate that to the citizens of the county. One other thing that I wanted to ask though about the life cycle impacts of the project. So, we're going to be taking water, and sounds like we're going to be able to treat it. What will happen to the solids that will be taken out? How will they be managed?
The majority of them will end up in that stormwater treatment area. That will remove the vast majority of solids. Now, that will require maintenance from time to time. Probably not for a while, but at some point in the future, it will require some maintenance, whether that's a controlled burn, probably not there, but there may be other options, drain it down, do certain things, but I don't know what the expected time frame is before something like that would be necessary, but I would think it would be on the order of over a decade, maybe a couple of decades before you'd have to do something to keep the nutrient removal rate sustained.
And the project is going to involve the installation of some new pumps and motors?
Yeah, a small pump station, probably a few pumps so that we can pump low flows up to 40 CFS, because a lot of the times we're not going to be pumping 40 CFS. We might be pumping 10 cubic feet per second. That, your small rains, steady kind of base flow, removing those nutrients, you'll pump the system dry if you're pumping 40 when the water levels aren't too high. So most of the time we'll probably be pumping 10 to 20, and then when the rainfalls come, we'll bump it up to 40. So it'll be monitoring the system, monitoring the water levels, and kicking in pumps as the stages increase.
And so there'll be diesel pumps?
Probably electric.
Okay.
Diesel's a bit noisy for that area, so I would think they'd be electric pumps of some sort.
Thanks.
So
Unfortunately, I don't think the power need really works for solar. I wish we could. We've used some solar pumps on some small things here and there, but we're talking a couple of cubic feet per second. So the panels would be pretty extensive to drive pumps that big.
So as Charles points out, we've got a real historical story to tell here. It would be great if we had some sort of expose in the paper or something that, combine that with what we're doing here and how the plan's working. So, go ahead, John.
If we recommend, and if the county budgets, this looks like a great opportunity for one of Daryl's videos where we can show what's flowing in and has for the last 100 years, some pictures from 100 years ago, to what will happen and stopping the solids, and more importantly, equally importantly, the nitrogen and phosphorus. So there's an opportunity.
Okay, great.
Yeah, we can work with the county staff with informational releases, stuff like that too, to have, because we do that too on our webpage. We put out things like that, so we'll kind of work with you on that.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Any more questions? Okay.
I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Do we have old business, Virginia?
No.
Okay, so Under new business, we're going to look at video outreach, the muck finders and Long Point
We have
Park
two quick
denitrification.
videos to share with you. Oh, okay, we have one video to share with you.
It's twice as long.
All right. This was produced by Marine Resources Council. Dr. John Treffery. Training the muck finder volunteers.
We'll be putting it up on the Facebook page. It's on MRC, the picture on there is what we're putting on. Plan on putting that up today.
Right.
Right, and yeah, we didn't get the video from Dylan, so we don't have that other one to show, so hopefully by the next meeting we'll have that one.
I spoke to him the night before last. He expected to have it, but guess not. So.
Yeah, he was out of state and,
Yeah.
or upstate and coming back yesterday. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to move to project withdrawals. And Matt has changed.
Okay, so we have.
So this is Courtney.
Yeah, Courtney Meyer, the stormwater engineer, and we have collected project withdrawals from the cities for year 0 and year 1 projects, and we've had quite a few, and in the agenda packet, they're listed in a table, and along with the letters that have the reasons as to why. We previously talked about the 4 from Cape Canaveral, probably October timeframe. Recently, I got a few from Palm Bay and Melbourne. I can say for Palm Bay and Melbourne, they have a couple projects they want to submit that will have better nutrient reduction in place of some of these. So it should hopefully, and I know Melbourne submitted one in the year 2 and 3 submittals that we just got that you guys are reviewing today. So that one, it has much more nutrient removal than previously, and it covers 2 of them. It covers general aviation and airport, I believe.
So, you know, these stormwater projects are never as easy as they initially look. And so last year, you know, in trying to find projects that were ready to go quickly, everybody raced out and grabbed ideas that, you know, they hoped would work out. And when you get out in the field and you start trying to figure out how to do them, sometimes it just doesn't work. And so, you know, some of these are where it just didn't work out. Some of the Cape Canaveral baffle boxes are completely underwater, so adding a screen to keep grass clippings up out of the water doesn't work when the whole thing is underwater. And in Melbourne's case, they identified, oh, well, if we move the project over here and did it a different way, it would be much more efficient. So let's do this project instead of these other ones. So I'm not concerned about these withdrawals. I think it's part of the learning curve and the process that we went through last year to try to move so quickly. But I'm encouraged that the cities are continuing to look and examine and rethink. And so we just wanted you to know that these projects were, that we had a request to withdraw them. And so our plan is that in the mid-year budgeting process, we would strike these from the budget and either allocate these funds to the new projects that are coming in, if they're ready to go, or put them into reserves in the trust fund, waiting for viable alternative projects to come in.
Okay, so in my case, when I had talked with our folks back in Cocoa, they had mentioned that, well, this is not enough incentive. Do you think there's any validity to that? Is it?
The big cocoa projects were very expensive, $3 and $4 million projects that they were undertaking, and our contribution was like $5,000 or $6,000.
Yeah.
Because it didn't have significant
impact.
So I can understand how they would feel that way, and we almost didn't fund it because it probably cost us more than $5,000 to give out $5,000.
Yeah.
So in that case, I can understand. I would hope, however, that the folks in Cocoa that are working on the waterfront renovation would look real strongly at mitigation utilizing living shorelines. And that project's being fast-tracked up there.
I think they are.
So I think we can help in that area if they will submit to this group.
I think it's appropriate for you to inform us of this, and thank you, as it goes along. I see no role for this committee to approve the withdrawal request, because I don't know what happens if we voted no.
Good point. Yeah.
I would just like to say what Virginia, or to repeat what Virginia said. I think it's really, I applaud the cities for coming back and saying, I'm sorry we designed this project, it didn't work.
Yep.
We're going to give you money back. I mean, there's $500,000 that we had appropriated that they're going to say, our project's not going to work here, take it back. And I think that that's something really good to see, and cities should be commended for doing that, taking the chance.
Vinny, I want to, just for clarity, because there's still folks in the public that don't understand how we do funding, we're actually not taking any money back. We never gave those cities money. They submitted projects, and once they completed them and they were monitored, we would reimburse for those projects. And I think it's great that people came up with ideas. Some of the ideas aren't going to work, and that they've said it isn't going to, or it wasn't financially or physically feasible, and we move on to some more ideas. So I think this was a great exercise that we started a year ago, and I applaud the cities for coming up with ideas and for recognizing when they don't work, and let's try something else.
Okay, so we'll move on to talking about the projects that will work, the year 2 substitute
Might work.
project requests.
So you have in your packet the 6 applications that we received, and Courtney worked with the municipalities to make sure their applications were complete and that they followed the nutrient removal benefit calculations consistently and according to the plan and the methods itemized in the plan and that are consistent with DEP methodologies wherever possible. You have the sample motion that worked so well for us, thanks to John Byron last year. And so this is your item, Chair.
Okay, so do we have any discussion on these?
I'd like to raise a couple points on just 2 of the small dollar amounts. I live in Cocoa Beach. They have to do with the city of Cocoa Beach. They're items 58 and 59. They are bioswale projects. Bioswale projects are pretty darn efficient. They not only capture basically 100% of the stormwater runoff that's in their catch basin, but they also filter it, and the little critters that live in the soil treat it. So the groundwater is much, much cleaner than what stormwater runoff that runs through a baffle box, which captures some of the stuff that might filter out if it's particulate, and the rest of it flushes into the river. And yet I note that the trust fund share of these two bioswale projects are around 5%. We have baffle box projects where we're asked to fund 35%. There are volume factors, there's a DEP formula, et cetera. But I guess I'd like to ask Wayne Cargino's in the room and Joni Regan's in the room, who are city staff for Cocoa Beach. Would you like to carry on a conversation with with Virginia and her people, and to see if the numbers are right, the small amounts of money you're asking for are right? If so, it would be my intention to move that these get kicked right 1 month and bring them back to us. Wayne, you want to chat some more with the folks here, or are you happy with the amount you've requested?
Actually, I think it was Joni's project.
Joni?
I think that we're going to try to do some monitoring and maybe show.
Say louder, please.
Does she want to come
She
up?
needs to speak into the mic so that everyone at home can hear her as well.
On television.
And it can get recorded, yeah.
I think that we're going to plan.
Introduce yourself, please.
Sorry, Joni Regan, City of Cocoa Beach, Stormwater Utility Manager. I think we are going to try to do some monitoring along with these projects, and it's also permeable pavers that I think we'll also see a lot more reduction in runoff, which is reduction in nitrogen. And if we show that, I think that, we'll probably try to be negotiating a better credit towards the project.
You can do this before next month?
No, that'll be part of the, we'll do construction, we'll do pre-monitoring and post-monitoring.
Is there a methodology for you to bump up the amount out of discretionary funds?
What we can do is we can use the respond money that we have available for monitoring to work with the city on a good monitoring plan.
And perhaps
help,
MRC.
Finance the monitoring plan to demonstrate what the benefits of these projects are, because you're absolutely right, pavers and bioswales are an excellent way to really capture the water and treat it and put it back where it should be, and we want to maximize the evaluation of the benefits of those projects.
You have a process to kick money back if later it proves they've done a better job.
Because again, we're keeping, fresh water from going to salt, and we're recharging the aquifers. So there's other benefits other than just the filtration.
Todd, and then John,
So
and then
the
Courtney.
outcome is that we think we might pay for some monitoring, and that could influence our methodology for evaluating future projects. So is that accurate?
That is accurate. What I'm hearing is if you want us to be able to change the cost share after the fact and reimburse them more, then we will need to go back to our contracting template and come up with how we would do. We do not have a mechanism to do that presently.
I want to go back. Okay, and John and Courtney.
All right, so I think I was going to ask the same thing. We have a request. Let's assume it's approved, the project occurs, the project delivers better results than the budget was based upon. Mm-hmm. Currently, we do not have a mechanism to increase our reimbursement for that extra success.
Correct.
We will look into doing that.
We have talked about, this committee has talked about setting performance standards and being willing to pay based on performance. That came up last year with the Malabar project. And so Malabar never came back wanting to pursue that, so we've never developed the legal language to do it. But
and I'm going to encourage you to do so in part. We want to make certain that there is an incentive at the municipal level and at private levels to create projects that are even more successful than they anticipate, and that incentive would be financial reimbursement at the same level that we've done, in the past. So I don't know if we need a motion to encourage county staff to do something like that, but I'd like to request that.
Okay, Courtney.
I agree. I think the whole point of the respond
is to continue to monitor and then change our plan as we move along. So I think it's important that we look at that. But I also think that data would be great for everyone because it would help us with stormwater credits for private individuals doing those things. So I would definitely encourage getting that done, and I appreciate you all.
And again, it's kind of
The
looking
one
at.
caveat I would introduce is that if we have allocated money to a project and it underperforms, let's not talk about taking the money back. That is politically fraught. We will
Well,
hear
and it's
from the county
lessons
commission
learned
if
is
we
what
do
it
that.
is, so.
Okay, do we need a motion
If a project
then?
doesn't meet performance criteria, should we pay for it?
Only if we've changed the Lagoon plan and had it approved by this county commission to say, that's what we're gonna do.
Agreed. Can I just real quick?
Yeah, Courtney.
So even if it takes us a while to monitor and all that, this level of reimbursement is worth it to you to go through the Lagoon?
We'll be
project
seeking
agreement and all that?
another sources of funds, so yes, TMDL. But again, this is kind of like low-impact development, so it's kind of keeping the runoff out of the lagoon to begin with, so we're recharging the aquifer, keeping fresh water fresh. So.
And Charles?
Yeah, so the only thing that made me pause on the two Cocoa Beach projects was that the price per nutrient removal was very high compared to the other projects. And I think there's a diminishing returns as you look at smaller projects and how much you're going to actually get out. I think it's worthy, but it just makes me pause a little bit about, do we want to, if we funded for that much money for the rate, does it set some sort of precedent for future projects that might be larger and demand more money?
And again, this is kind of redeveloping old infrastructure and keeping it upstream versus just a filter in the ground that allows the runoff to keep going through it, and you're taking out the pollutants. So.
Danielle, and then Todd, and then Courtney.
I think it would be nice to have some sort of standard for the cost for removal for immediate treatment and then for long-term. Like the St. John's project, that's going to be long-term. We're going to see benefits for a really long time. Something like this, we'll see benefits for a really long time. So we're looking at cost for removal today, but the long-term benefit for the lagoon is there.
And operating costs with this kind of a system would be less too. It's pretty much ground maintenance versus getting inside and constantly cleaning out. Especially if you got high, water levels where it's hard to maintain a wet environment.
Todd, did you still want to make?
Yeah, I guess just the only comment back to the cost for removal is, we have our basis, and that's why the initial reimbursement is low, and the city's making that decision to spend more. So the removal cost is high, but they've got other benefits that are causing them to do the project. And so really that's the beauty of the plan, is it allows the government, that local government, to make a choice for the other interests that they may have, and then the money that we're responsible for is being allocated at the appropriate threshold for the mass we're removing. So I think it's still entirely appropriate.
And there's small pilot projects, so it is easier to spend the money on paying for the monitoring. You're not trying to monitor a huge basin.
And then my last comment is, I like the pay for performance concept. We just need to be really thoughtful on it, because we could have, what happens if we pay $2 million for this big St. John's project, and our rainfalls are that much more, and now we get 50% more removal for it in a future year, and the revenues are down, and we're in a slump. So it's a slippery slope. It's a great idea. I love pay for performance, but it has major policy implications. We need to be thoughtful on that one.
And Courtney.
Perhaps we might even ask the commission for guidance on that.
I just wanted to reiterate that we've had similar discussions before, and the high cost is what you're going to see in developed, retrofit projects that are in areas that have no wide open spaces for large stormwater lines. So that's, what you're going to see in downtowns, beachside, existing neighborhoods, are higher cost because you have to work around what's there.
And $100 a pound is pretty low, across in general for nitrogen removal.
John Durkee and Charles?
And not specific to this project, but back to, we agreed to pay essentially for the first year projected nitrogen pounds per on an annual basis, but we're not paying that same amount every single year. We're assuming we're going to pay it for the first year and that we're going to get multi-year benefit without having to pay for it. So I don't think we need to think about a different cost structure. We've formulated one that seems to make sense. My only conversation was that if in monitoring it demonstrates more success, we look at a way to incentivize the cities to do these projects, because they have long-term benefit even though we pay short-term. Does that make sense?
I think of that as the priority, the ones that have long-term benefits. Just
All of them should have long-term benefit.
I know we're starting to dive into these projects, and I think it's good. We had previously talked about substituting projects versus appending the plan or adding on to. Do we need to have, or should we have that discussion, because that's part of the motion before we start talking about the projects, or should we go into the projects first, and then whoever's left alive after can figure out the substitution?
Why can't we go right into the motion?
Thank you.
And just add it into the motion?
Todd, were you going to comment? Okay. John?
We're at the agenda item that says year 2 substitute project request. I move that Save Our Indian River Lagoon Project Plan Oversight Committee recommend modification to Save Our Indian River Lagoon Project Plan to include all the projects 58 through 63 listed in the January 2018 project action list.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Can we have
Aye.
Discussion
I'm sorry.
and public comment?
I have a discussion. I
Go ahead,
just
Vinny.
wanted to say, I know some of these projects had educational components, and I know some of them didn't. And I think for me, that is one of the biggest things. I know Charles mentioned an ecotourism and educational piece for the St. John's Water Management. Gainesville has a Paynes Prairie, and there's kind of this little boardwalk that goes out into the prairie area, and the local schools can go there. I just think it's real important that we think about these projects as we do them, that we think about education and outreach. And I would love to see that built into every project. And I know that some of these cities may not have in-house departments for outreach and education, but I'd imagine any school in any jurisdiction would be happy to team up with that municipality to work on that education piece. So I would just love to see that included.
And I agree, and even in talking about the St. John's project, the historical aspect, I mean, maybe there are lots of opportunities to partner here with local NGOs or even the Historical Society to really tell this story and get the word out.
Of our public schools too, all the people that do the education.
Public comment?
Public comment.
And just to clarify the motion, this is not to substitute against anything. This is additional to the projects that are already scheduled for year 1.
The word is modification, so whether it's a substitution or...
So modification, modifying the plan.
I know, but the headline actually says substitution, so I want to be clear that our intention is this modification is additional projects.
Not necessarily. Could be plug and play.
Okay, then I'm not clear.
How'd we handle it last year?
Last year was different.
Last year, they were substitution projects. I think if you want to move now that you like this list of projects, right, that is a change to the plan, that gets that done, and then you can have a separate motion on whether you want us to grow the plan or whether you want us to treat these as substitutions for the least cost-effective projects in the plan.
Okay.
We had previously talked about using, well, I can save that if you want to do it in a 2-step process.
Okay, Courtney.
Could we agree that these are great projects today, and then on Monday when we get the rest of the projects, so next meeting, we could look at those, and then if we need to remove some of the ones in the plan for substitute, maybe you could give us a list of staff recommended projects that you think we could substitute, and that would help us figure out what's better,
Do we have a time constraint before putting this before the county? I mean, this is not required to approve today, right? From a timing standpoint for budgeting?
I mean, I think it would be
Right.
nice for the cities to know whether or not we think
Yeah.
the project is what
I agree.
Can we thus
So
do
do we
just
need
a
to-
sense of the group instead of recommending this into the budget? Is that the same, Courtney, from a, no?
Madam Chairman, there's a motion before the body.
Okay. So all those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, the motion passes. Now discussion on, do we have discussion left then?
General public and on escalation.
Okay, we'll open it up to general public comment. And Virginia. Yeah.
Sorry, do you want to talk about John Durkee's? Is this an addition or a substitution? Or you just want us to bring back what the potential swaps would be, and then you'll have that discussion next month? Okay?
But I think today we basically told the cities in this list.
And that's what we did last year, was we brought you the list of this goes in, this would come out.
Right, yeah. And I think we basically, today, we said this list is good. You know, so.
But it's not a full and complete list yet.
Right.
John Byron?
But at a future date, we will have presented to us a proposed change to the Lagoon plan with the details, and it will tell us how we're going to spend $32 million plus unobligated funds from the last fiscal year that just closed out. And A, that's going to fit in there pretty darn nice. And B, you're going to have to scramble around and find another place to spend money.
Right.
We are not talking about which kids we throw off the sleigh, but rather how many more we can get on.
I agree, I think this is a good problem to have, you know, that we're being able to fund everything we want to do.
Yeah. All right, one more process question regarding next month. So the committee has previously directed us to set aside $840,000 for potentially helping the customer side on the sewage leak issue. And then last month, you also directed us to move forward with the grass clipping partnership with MRC and grass clipping campaign. So my thought on that is we won't put those in as substitution requests. They came from you. But we will put them, just like you had this summary list today of the 6 projects you were considering, we'll put that on next month's list with all the other projects, so that when you say, this is everything we want to go into the next plan update, those will be on the list.
But they've been approved.
But you've already approved them.
Thank you.
But this will make them part of your recommendation
Yeah,
to the
they're
county
part of the
commission.
recommendation.
Nor as part of the final package.
Right.
Okay.
And just to let everybody know that the sewer utility has already provided the scope of work on the smoke testing, and I think we're starting in the middle of next month, so they're moving very quickly on it. So they're getting it done.
Okay. Great. Do we have public comment? Marilyn, and then George.
Good morning, I'm MJ Waters. I'm here representing the Brevard Indian River Lagoon Coalition. And one comment and one point of information. The comment is I really urge you to continue to move forward with your outreach to the cities about the sewage release process that they all have, because there's still a great deal of interest in the community about that. So I think that will be really valuable for you to gather that information and then share it out with the community. Secondly, in terms of the Senate Bill 786, this morning, Lou Kontnick, our communications representative for the coalition, sent out a memo to all of our partner organizations encouraging them to support the passage of that bill. And we're asking them to post it on all their communication sites and social media. And we're going to be having weekly calls internally about updates on that bill, which we will be happy to share with you. Virginia's pretty close to that already, I'm sure. But just wanted you to know that we're taking a strong advocacy role. This especially this year in the legislative session, because there's going to be a lot of opportunities for water-related and lagoon-related funding, and even some septic to sewer conversions. So we're going to be out there with the citizens and the environmental groups advocating strongly for that. Thank you.
Thank you. George?
My name is George Rosenfeld. Excuse me. In the past couple of months, I brought up about the county commission, in my estimation, sabotaging the work of the projects here. With the letter from the state economist that I gave and talked about once, he's also the economics professor at Florida State. Has anything been done about this with the county commission to get them more in line and stop some of the new development that's going on, which is really sabotaging us? Such as they approved the North Merritt Island development, and now the Transportation Project Office is having meetings next month on the 5th and the 8th, and I know it's for building more roads and opening up new areas for more development. What else could it be for? Such as the Heritage Parkway, for example, is, in my estimation, is a subterfuge to open up the Platte land, similar to the Doodle lands that have been opened up for development. The second thing I have is on the Crane Creek project. Everything that was said about it was west of the coastal ridge, and if the weir that they showed works, then all the agricultural trash and everything that won't come down into the lagoon. However, east of the ridge, the Crane is the original Crane Creek, which drains all of the development in Melbourne and the Melbourne Mall, and has caused problems. And of course, there's the, I forget the name of the road, it parallels just west of Babcock Street, which originally was built with a very small culvert for Crane Creek to go through, and now they've opened it up with, I think, 3 larger culverts or something. But a friend of mine lives 3 houses up from that road, and they're about 20-some feet above the creek, and they had 3 feet of water in their basement from the last floods. So some more things have to be done about Crane Creek anyway, which may be beyond what we're doing is for the lagoon, but just for Melbourne, some things should be done. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Any more public comment? Any comment from committee members?
I do.
Yes.
2 things. One, Mr. Tredik's slide that says we're taking out this much nitrogen, this much phosphorus, and this much TSS. And somebody tell me what that means. I assume it's particulate matter.
Total suspended solids.
Okay.
Yeah.
Particulate matter.
Yes.
It caught my eye because although there may be stuff attached to it, nutrients, it also by itself, clay particles and so on, add to the turbidity of the river. And this affects its ecology as well. Do we deal with TSS as a assignment factor?
Yeah, it's in the project applications as well. They quantify the TN, TP, and TSS removal benefits.
Do we put a dollar price against it? Is this one of the metrics we measure, or we just say, wow, that's a lesser included good?
No, we don't reimburse based on it, but we are quantifying it.
Could we just ask you to sort of think about that a little bit, you and Matt and your team, and see if there's something we're supposed to explore science and technology and how this sucker works through that lens. I wonder if there might not be a future time where we'd want to think about incorporating this into our funding formulas. This is not an immediate thing, but I think it's worth some thought. The second thing I have has got to do with education. We've had conversations in this body before that says that $125K a year for 5 years to tell people about fertilizer is probably woefully short of what we should have in the area of communications and education. And so I'll say, as just a voting member of the committee, that I would expect by the time we're looking at the final Lagoon plan change recommendation going to the county commission, that you would answer 3 questions for us. How much should we be spending? What should we be spending it for? And should it be for 5 years or 10? I think the answer is a lot more for a lot more in 10 years. But I just want to remind you that we'll be looking for that. And I happen to sit next to a guy who's got some wonderful thoughts on this topic as well.
No, I agree.
So
both of those points, yeah.
Yes, we've heard you and the committee loud and clear on that issue, and Brandon Smith that's one of his key projects, is to figure out how to expand the outreach program. What we don't want to do is duplicate effort, and so the Indian River Lagoon program has contracted with Dr. Martha Monroe. She's was one of your first presenters here. She's looking at, they've been doing surveys of folks in the community. What are their attitudes? What is their knowledge? You know, what are their thoughts on these various sources of pollution, so we understand our audience. Marine Resources Council is also following up with their communications assembly. They've got a team of people who have volunteered to look at, you know, what is it that we need to be communicating about. And the first meeting that committee is going to be trying to identify a list of what are those top priority things that we should be focusing on for outreach campaigns. And so rather than creating a third process to separately come up with what those priorities are, we're trying to work through those 2 existing processes. And unfortunately, they're just gearing up in February, and we really want to have an answer in March. I'm not today still sure how we're going to do that, but I still thought it was better to wait than to get out there in front of those other 2 processes. So we want to get to where you want us to get. We just want to do it through a partnership approach with these other folks that already have this work underway.
Okay, and Courtney, and then John Windsor.
And then John.
Oh, I'm sorry, okay.
John.
Courtney.
So I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I have heard about this Merritt Island project from more than just this meeting. I can't go anywhere without getting yelled at about that project. So I know that there's many reasons why projects are approved that maybe community members don't understand, but I think it would be good if you don't mind, to look into maybe asking some of our environmental groups to maybe put together, and I can work with them to put together maybe a little committee that can work on lagoon-friendly land development regulations or something like that that has a little bit more to do with development, that we can maybe bring some ideas back to both the planning and zoning departments, both cities and county. Just because I think, you know, he's right. I mean, we're doing all this work and then we're not doing anything to prevent some of the issues that are happening across the county. And so I don't want to sound like I'm going to go down, beating down the door of the county about that project. I think we should be a little bit more positive. We can't really change the past, but we can look at, you know, I know our city is looking at very similar issues because of, you know, the challenges we're having with environmental issues, and I think we can do the same everywhere. So if you don't mind, I'd like to just talk to some of the groups to see if they're willing to stick their necks out and do some of that work for us.
Some of the nonprofit groups?
Yeah. Is that okay?
I'd like to see that conversation take place. Yeah.
So maybe I can just bring back some ideas on how we can do something like that.
That would be great. John, do you still want to respond?
Yeah, and I know
different
this is
subject.
supposed to be the end of end comments, and here we continue to have discussions, which I think is absolutely wonderful. Virginia, the two activities that are going on, the research of what the message should be, seems almost redundant to the funding that we provided to MRC last time, because they were going to research what the message relative to grass clipping should be. So it seems like they're kind of doing the same thing already, so let's hold off and find out. I'm with you on that. But remember, John, this is only $125,000. Specifically, it was on fertilizer.
For 5 years.
Yeah, I know. That seems like a lot of money to tell people not to use fertilizer, in my view. George is right, and you're right, Courtney. Florida was the third fastest growing by percentage population in the last decade, and there's not, I don't like it, but I'm not sure there's much we can do about it. So the message needs to be, how with the population growth that we're going to experience, can we limit and mitigate the impact upon the lagoon and our environment? Because we're not going to stop. We're not going to stop the growth, and there was some really good articles about that this week. And lastly, and really most importantly, it's been a year since this group started. I thank the public that's always here and reaches out, has great ideas, and holds us accountable. And all of you, it's been a real pleasure. I'm learning. I appreciate your tolerance. It's really a great group that's been put together in this year. And I don't know how we built an airplane and flew it at the same time, but we did so. And here we go forward, and we're going to make some progress.
Okay. John Windsor?
Yes, I'm
And then
hopelessly
Danielle.
addicted to the Space Coast Government Channel. And I actually watch meetings of other municipalities and the one I live in. And while watching the most recent Melbourne City Council meeting, Jenny Lamb, who's sitting in the back row there, was queried by several council members about how much money was Melbourne getting from this plan. And I just didn't like the tone and the attitude of like, how much are we getting out of this? So I think it would be wise if at some point in time we had a spreadsheet that showed how much money from the plan was going to each of the municipalities. Because I suspect Melbourne's not the only one that's asking the same kind of question.
It's whatever you ask for.
Yeah.
You got to participate
I mean,
first.
it's the people that are asking, right?
I know.
You want to outline the projects there too.
Yeah.
A city with 3 or 4 projects versus one with one.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. Okay, we've got Danielle, and then John Byron, and then Todd. Did you have your hand up too? We'll go with Danielle.
I was just wanting to comment back on what do we do about all of this development coming, and that is creating the standard for sustainable growth.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to volunteer, but I don't know if I'm allowed to talk to Courtney about that. I'm the chair of the Green Committee.
What I could do is bring something back, and if we do have multiple people interested, I mean, I can even offer my city support from a sunshine perspective and provide the videotapes and the notices and things like that, if that's something we all want to do later. So I'll bring back some of those ideas and keep that in mind that some other people might want to participate in those meetings.
Okay, and John.
I go back to education and communication. I used to work for an admiral who said that sometimes money is a fairly cheap commodity. In this case, I think that's true. We're about to spend approaching $500 million in 10 years. If we haven't at the same time changed attitudes, changed lifestyles, changed practices in commerce and business and what's for sale and what the kids say around the dinner table, we will have wasted 10 years and $10.5 billion. Education really matters. If you want to know what I got in mind, I live in a world, or used to live in a world of MEDAX budgeting. I wouldn't blink the tiniest bit if you said we want to put together a massive education communication project that costs $1 million a year. That's just to give you a benchmark from one voting member. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to support that statement because I think education is the biggest bang for the buck as well. And I'm glad to announce that COCO has just formed a Sustainability Advisory Board, that Courtney and City of Satellite Beach and the IRL Coalition have really been, have really helped to inspire and form that, so I appreciate that. Do we have other comments?
I did just one thing on I think John's point about maybe some way that we could answer questions so Jenny doesn't have to scramble to find them is important. But I think it's also important to make sure that we craft the message of whatever document we put out, that it's not, well, this city got this much money, we need to double that, so just start throwing projects at the wall and see what sticks. I think it's great to encourage municipalities to get involved, and that should be the goal of whatever document we put out, is the encouragement, not a faction war of we got this much money and such. But I mean, I'm sure whatever comes out will do that, but I think it's important to make sure we tailor the message of whatever we're making available.
I just want to add on to that, because we launched this entire meeting with a discussion of that we've got concerns about being able to spend the increased revenues that are coming in. So the messaging is incredibly important, because we're not denying, and we haven't been in a position to reject projects that have removals that meet our thresholds. And so messaging to discussions of that nature becomes very important, because right now we are still in the mode of that if you bring us projects that meet our thresholds, we anticipate giving you everything you ask for. And so until that dynamic changes, I think our messaging needs to focus on throw projects at the wall, because if they meet our thresholds, we got money to spend on it, and we want to do it because we want to move things forward. We want to make progress, so come up with them. And that has to be the messaging. We need people to come up with ideas and be creative and figure out how to get things moving.
This is the opposite of Field of Dreams. That was build it and they will come. We're saying you all come and we'll build it for you. And I think that message needs to go out.
Yeah, and again, it's all about reaching that tipping point on front-loading as much as possible so that we can get to that point where nature's own processes start to help out. And you know, the education, again, I think another reason the education and communication is so important is to maintain the public's resolve, because we've got a lot of support and love out there right now, but, you know, things could change on a dime where, you know, it starts to be less so. So the long-term education and communication,
We need
I really
to keep the
support.
message up that it took a long time to get here, because anybody that's been out on the water in the last 4 or 5 weeks, even with the cold, okay, first off, we obviously had a snook kill and a tarpon kill in the north part of the county. I don't know where else it is. There still is not clean water like you would expect this time of year. You can't sight fish, you can't even see 6 inches. The turbidity is horrible. It's a brown algae that's out there, and I listen to people and they say to me, you guys are charging us taxes and the river doesn't look any better. And it's been a year, and quite frankly, you know, the natural weather patterns probably will have more impact to us than $500,000, but people need to know this problem exists. It's existed a long time. Grass doesn't just magically come back, you know, and we're doing what we can do, but have patience.
Well, I think an important part of the education is understanding what people think. And, you know, like I said, we're here a year, we haven't had any improvements, or the other thing I hear is that the manatees are causing the problems in the lagoon because of their waste products. And so it's really important from an education standpoint to understand these things so you can dispel those. And then, because if you have to build on knowledge, on real knowledge. You can't build on these falsehoods. So we need to understand that, and you can change people's behavior, getting to what John was saying. I mean, who would have thought, you know, 15, 10 years ago, we'll all be cleaning up dog poop after our dogs. But we got people most people to do that. So change can happen, but it does take, you know, understanding people's behavior and getting them to do what they need to do. That's helps the lagoon.
Let me add one to John's point about an educational plan or something. Virginia, would there be a way to combine, and obviously you'd have to bring us something, educational financial incentives to go along with these projects. Because that way, instead of us just saying we encourage education, we could actually say we will help fund some of the education. Since there is a project going on in a local city, I think that really amplifies the message. I don't know, just an idea that hit me. It's John's fault.
But I would note that all the substitute projects we're going to see is a small proportion of the total spending. We've got a whole bunch of other projects that are already in the plan. And to piggyback on Vinnie's point, I wonder if we shouldn't have a small set aside in every one of them as an educational component, some percentage. $2 million to go dredge a canal, all right, 5% of that goes to telling the public all about it. They thought.
Boy, how much do they want to know about dredging?
Exactly. I'd rather that money go into dredging and getting it out of the water. We'll worry about whether they understand the value later.
Well, but
Pick another topic.
I do think, though, even a simple mailing to everybody who lived along that canal, this is what's going on, this is why, simple, big pictures, colorful, maybe even a musical card. We can have John record singing a song. I mean, seriously, something that is entertaining, but something that just lets people know, look, this is what's going on in your neck of the woods. And then that way, when they're hanging out with their friends at baseball games or football games, they're like, did you see that? You know, they're dredging this canal. And that helps that word of mouth, that grassroots effort. I don't know. Again, it's a cost, process, procedure thing, but I don't know if it's a good way to interject that education piece.
I like the card and song idea.
The education that I definitely think we need to focus on, particularly now that it will soon be growing season, it will soon warm up, and there will be many dollars spent by Scots and everybody else to tell you to go out and buy fertilizer.
Right.
And at that point, we need education that says no phosphorus in this county, long, slow release nitrogen only, and by the way, do you even need it? You don't if you're using reclaimed water. We know that. You might not if you need well water. That's a message that we need to get out.
And keep it away from seawalls.
Oh, and obviously, and keep it out of the canals, and keep it out of the streets, and keep it out of the sewage system, et cetera.
And Todd?
I think it's just important that, we talk about spending money on it, and I fully support that, but how we go about it and distinctly what our objectives are, because everything we just talked about is connected. And if we try to tell people, if we try to tell people about their lawns, it's not as well received. But when we start to make connections, oh, did you see this big gigantic project that we're spending millions of dollars on? Do you know what prevents us from having to do that in the future? As we start to draw those connections, there's a lot of pieces that we build education on people. We start to connect the things that we're having to do that we'd really prefer to not be doing with the actions that they can take to prevent that in the future. So how we go about spending this money and what we spend it on and our true objectives, to me, is really important, and we need to embark on that very thoughtfully. And that's not this committee, other than giving, insight and direction that ultimately the staff then delivers on.
The picture I have in mind is not that this committee becomes a communication education organ. We have stepped into that to some extent. It's been handed off to the county staff. They've hired staff to do that and spending money against it. But I think the ultimate high leverage for us is probably two steps. The first step is to have the county staff come to us with their master plan for how we might spend 9 more years worth of education and communication dollars. And then I think it goes into the same sort of things we're dealing with now, which are projects. And this would be a communication project. This would be, give me $300K this year, and I'm going to build the finest television presence you've ever seen for this, and so on. We're enabling and using leverage and using money as our primary tool.
Yeah.
So I have a theory about meetings that are short on the agenda, and that members will typically talk a lot and extend the meeting anyway. and we are proving my theory correct today.
Yeah, that's true, because doesn't our meeting go to 10:30?
Yeah.
So we actually had the opportunity.
11:30.
Oh, it does go to 11:30?
We normally get out by it.
Well, we normally get out at 11:30, but is that when it was?
So I would recommend that if we want to talk about the education, direction, that we put it on the agenda and do that next meeting.
Okay.
Second the recommendation. Can we make a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Okay.
I second.
And okay, well, Todd had his hand up, but I'll let him go. Okay. All those in favor to adjourn? We don't even need a motion, but that we're done. Thank you.
We're trying to balance out 2017 meetings that were all.
The opinions expressed by any member of the public during any period of public comment do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, Space Coast Government Television, or the program sponsor, and are solely those of the presenter. The Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, Space Coast Government Television, and the program sponsor hereby expressly disclaim any and all responsibility or liability for any defamatory or slanderous statements expressed by any member of the public during any such period.